MP, who's going to kick off our rally this evening. Thank you, John.
Only a few weeks ago, Save the Children, the charity, did a survey. They identified that in this country, the 7th richest in the world, 1 in 7 children couldn't afford, their families couldn't afford a warm winter coat this winter. They discovered 1 in 8 parents now are sacrificing eating a meal so their children can eat. That's what our society is faced with at the moment. Today's budget statement, we've just come from the Commons. What Osborne did today was cut another $4 billion off welfare benefits, cutting to the poorest, whilst he was giving a tax break to the big corporations because he's cut corporation tax at the same time. Also in that statement was sacking another 13,000 civil servants and another cut right there across every government department. They're also introducing local pay bargaining in schools now. They're introducing a system of not just performance pay, but every school now will have the ability to negotiate their own local pay rate based upon some form of performance, which will clearly mean they start victimising any individual teacher that stands up and argues for national pay bargaining. They're introducing it in prisons and now discussing it on the NHS as well. This means a vast swathe of cuts. This is what we call class war. They know it is. That's why our response has got to be now. We've got to stand up and start fighting back. That means now those unions like PCS and others who today are now announcing that they're balancing for industrial action in the new year need to be joined with by every other union. No union can stand aside at this stage. It's not just about coordinated action to bring this government down. What we need now is an anti-capitalist force that destroys this system, because we can't stand by and allow this brutalisation and implementation of poverty politics that this government is undertaking. There's a need now for courage and determination, but above all else, solidarity to protect our class. Solidarity.
Our next speaker is going to be Joe Cardwell from Amnesty International and Unite the Union, and Joe's just been on strike for the last 2 days. Joe.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, we've had 2 really fantastic one-day strikes at Amnesty International. I'm not here speaking on behalf of the organisation, I'm speaking here on behalf of the trade union. And the reason why we've been out on strike is because we have had repeated breach of agreements at Amnesty from our management. And when we talk about breach of agreement, it doesn't sound too exciting, but actually for us in Amnesty, we know that collective bargaining and the right to defend your rights and your agreements at work is an essential part of being a trade unionist. And it's an essential part of human rights as well, because for us, workers' rights are human rights. That's what we campaign for across the world, is the right for people to organise at work to defend themselves. And actually, if it can happen at Amnesty, it can happen anywhere. At our sister organisation, Amnesty International UK, they've been out on strike 3 days over the threats of redundancies in their organisation. The threats have been held off because they've called an emergency general meeting in January, and we'd like to call on all Amnesty members to get along to that EGM in January to help overturn the decision to make workers redundant in Amnesty International UK. And actually, what has this got to do at the moment with what's happening with the government today and with austerity? I tell you what, austerity and the crisis is the backdrop that's being used and the argument that's being used everywhere to attack workers' rights. They're pushing forward on flexibility. They're pushing forward on low pay. They want to make it easier to sack workers. And yet at the same time as they're doing that to us, look at the cuts they're making in the civil service, especially in Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, where actually these are the very people that can hold to account these bastards like Starbucks and Amazon who are ripping us off left, right and centre. And this is an absolute scandal, not just these companies, but actually, when you think about it, it's perfectly legal at the moment that the top 10% of households in Britain own £4.5 trillion worth of wealth. That's legal, and it's disgusting, and it should be stopped. There should be a maximum wage implemented. There should be a cap on how much money you're allowed to hold in this country, because these people are stitching us up left, right and centre. So how do we stop it? How do we stop this? Because actually we've had a call for a general strike, but I'll tell you what, at the moment, any national strike would do me. I want to see anybody out there fighting, because I want to give that solidarity. And actually, when you think about us striking, Connaught School are striking, RMT cleaners are striking, there are fights breaking out across this country at a lower level. The national leadership of our unions need to catch up. They need to catch up and call some decent bloody action, because this government is nasty, it's divided and it's weak, and it's us that can bring it down. Come on, Len McCluskey, come on, Dave Prentice, come on, the rest of the unions. Let's see a real fight back now.
Our next speaker is Mark Campbell from UCU National Executive Committee and London Met.
Well, I think Joe's just said an awful lot of what I wanted to say, and it's quite simple, really. On the 14th of November, across Europe, we had general strikes all across Europe. Why didn't we have one here? Why weren't we on general strike in Britain? I tell you what, I was at the TUC as a delegate from my union, and yes, it was agreed by 4-1 that we would be considering a general strike. Well, the point is, I think we've had enough time to consider it. Now we need to start organising it, because £4 billion a year is being cut from welfare. That's a return to the 1930s. We can't just sit back and allow it to happen. We have to be fighting back. And I tell you what, at London Met, you'll have seen the situation with international students. What they did there was basically turn around and said, our international students aren't welcome, and what we want to do is deport 3,000 of them. Absolutely disgraceful. And the idea behind that is Theresa May trying to blame immigrants for the situation in this country. That's not the problem. They are the problem, not immigrants. It's the Tories, the bangers, and all the rest of them who got us into this mess. And it's about time our union leaders, including my own, got off their knees and started organising. The only way you beat a bully is by standing up to a bully and fighting back. Next Tuesday, the TUC are meeting. We should be lobbying the TUC. We should be out there on Tuesday and saying, when are we having the strikes that can win? Because it's no good a little bit here and a little bit there. Of course we will support them. Of course we'll support all workers that fight back. But we now need unity, so we come out in our millions and we actually stop these bastards before there's nothing else left to fight for.
Our next speaker is Owen Jones, a fantastic fighter on our side, who spoke brilliantly on the news about Gaza the other day, a breath of fresh air amongst all those politicians. So we welcome Owen. Thank you.
Friends, it is bloody nippy. Cameron's bloody Britain for you. But it's so good to see so many people out here who are determined to fight back. Now, when you stand up for the bottom 70%, they call you a class warrior. You stand up for the top 1%, they call you a moderate. But let's be clear about those people across the road. They are class warriors, and they are fighting class war on behalf of the top 1% of this country. Austerity, what austerity is an attempt to use a crisis of the market and turn it into a crisis of public spending, to get away with policies they know otherwise they never would get away with. The privatisation of our NHS, the onslaught against workers' rights, what remain in this country, the trebling of tuition fees, and the hacking to death of our welfare state. Now, I just want to give you an example of the human consequences of what is happening to welfare at the moment. Last year alone, 1,100 disabled people in the first 8 months were found fit for work and subsequently died. And I'll give you one example. Karen Sherlock, her liver was failing. She was preparing for dialysis. She said each day was tough. She was found fit for work and was told to find a job. She died in June. And as Sue Marsh, her friend, the disability rights campaigner, said, she died in fear. And she died because cruel men refused to listen and powerful men refused to act. Those stories are happening right across Britain at the moment. We are seeing at the same time the biggest squeeze in living standards since my gran was born in the early 1920s, whilst it remains boom time for the people at the top. And this must be our mission, because at the moment my fear is this: they are redirecting people's justifiable anger from those at the top who caused this crisis to people's neighbours down the streets, the working poor against the unemployed, non-disabled people against disabled people, private sector workers against public sector workers, the politics of divide and rule. You've been mugged, so why shouldn't your neighbour be mugged as well? Which is why we are there to give people hope. We are there to be the opposition, because at the moment there's not much opposition in Parliament. We have to build the opposition on the streets to put pressure on those who are there to represent us, to force them kicking and screaming if needs be, to fight back. And above all, to give people at the moment out there in the country who often feel resigned to what is happening and are lacking hope, to give them hope and courage and confidence to fight back. We stand together, we fight together, and we will win together. Thank you.
And our next speaker is Paul from Connaught School, and he's here with members from his school. And they have been on strike today, and they're on strike tomorrow, and they're striking against the privatisation, the fragmentation of our education system, the destruction of comprehensive education. So I welcome Paul and his members from Connaught School.
Come on. Thanks. Look, I want to introduce some of the bravest trade union members you'll ever see in your entire life, and I'll tell you the reason why. Our members have been on strike now for 7 days in the last 2 months. We are basically taking up the fight. We only have 22 members, but I'm telling you, they're the 22 bravest members you'll ever see in your entire life. Why? Because everything our school has thrown at us, an attempt to become an academy, we have resisted. And we've said, no, we're not accepting it. We're not accepting it when the governing body turns around and says 8 to 6 in favour of converting to an academy, despite the fact that it has completely ignored every single bit of the consultation. They ignored the parents, they ignored the staff, they ignored the local community, and we decided after 2 days of strike, even though they voted for it, we're going to keep going. In fact, despite the fact that they voted for it, we've had even more days of action, and we're out again tomorrow, and we'll be out again next week. Why? Because it's a very simple thing. If we go down, they all go down in Waltham Forest, and we're holding up Waltham Forest, we're fighting back, and we're taking a fight to them. I'll tell you something what our members done as well. We stuck all our names on a letter and a leaflet saying to the parents, these are your teachers, these are the people who are prepared to defend your education, and we've got support all over our community. What we need is for every single one of you to spread the word about the lobby for next week when the governors meet, so that we keep up this pressure, so that we keep it up, so that they know that they are not going to get away with this, that we're going to keep fighting, and that we will win. Thank you.
Please give a big warm welcome for our next speaker. It's Rosie from UK Uncut, and she's going to tell us about the action that they've got planned for Saturday.
Starbucks, we're coming to get you! This Saturday, up and down the country, men, women and children will be transforming the tax-dodging bastards that are Starbucks into women's services that we refuse to lose. Women's services are being decimated by these cuts. 230 women a day are rejected from refuges because they just can't be taken in, while Starbucks just gets away with paying no corporation tax. Are you angry about that? I'm so angry! So, as a part of the fight back, we're going to be occupying Starbucks stores this Saturday all over the country, from Aberdeen to Cornwall. We've got 37 actions going on. So I'm telling you about this. Get out there on the streets this Saturday. There's 7 actions in London, from Brixton, Greenwich, Angel, and there's 2 in central London in their flagship stores, where we'll be turning them into creches and refuges. So bring your own coffee, bring your own kids, and see you on the streets. Woo!
Our next speaker is Andy Green from DPAC.
Thank you. So we know it doesn't work. We know that cutting jobs doesn't work. We know that slashing services doesn't work. We know that putting more power into the hands of the bosses certainly doesn't work. But we also know what does work. What works is getting out in the streets. What works is building solidarity, politicising people, listening to their stories and giving them an alternative, giving them a mechanism for fighting back, because that's what works. Resistance, out there, occupying, striking, causing chaos. And I'll tell you something, on Monday we had the International Day of Disabled People. And on Monday we had this outrageous, disgraceful decision by this government to force disabled people who have already been denied their disability benefits into mandatory work placement on threat of sanction. We're not going to have that. We're not going to have that as people. We're not going to have that as a disabled community, and we're not going to have that as a society. We will be fighting back tooth and nail to win back the ground that this government has whittled away in its short time in government. We will be making sure that where there is a fight to be had, we're at the front. Because across communities, whether it's in defence of disabled people, whether it's in defence of services, fire stations, libraries and badgers, we have to come out together. Because when we come out together and fight together, nothing can stop us. Solidarity.
Our next speaker is Victoria, and she is a nurse at Lewisham Hospital, where they've been putting up a fantastic fight against the threatened closure to their hospital. So Victoria.
Hi, good evening, my name's Victoria. Sorry. I work for Lewisham Hospital NHS Trust, but I am not here as their representative tonight. I'm here as a representative of, sorry, I'm not used to public speaking, of the Save Lewisham Hospital campaign and the Hospital Workers Group. I don't know if everyone knows what's been happening in Lewisham, but we're at the mercy of someone called a Trust Special Administrator. And this man has come here, been appointed by the government to rejig the services in South East London because of the PFI debts. And the decision that has been made, or their draft report that's been submitted so far, they would like to shut a clinically sound, working to surplus, which is very rare for an NHS hospital, and much needed hospital. 220,000 people use that hospital. 4,400 babies are born there every year. 350 adults and 100 children use the A&E service every day. Those people will have no other option when that hospital is closed. What we're doing, we had a demonstration a couple of weeks ago. 15,000 local residents turned out in support of its local hospital. We are going to be calling for an all-London demo, because this doesn't just affect Lewisham. If we lose this fight, everyone loses this fight. If we don't win, they will use this procedure to pick apart the rest of the NHS, and we will end up with private services. That is not what anyone wants. So join us at the All London Demo in January. The date will be announced on the Save Lewisham Hospital website. Also, any trade unionists that want to get involved, that want to help, that want to support us, Monday the 10th on the hospital grounds in the Louis Club, there is a trade unions meeting chaired by the Trades Council. Please come along, share your ideas, give us your support. And yeah, don't let the NHS die. We need you guys to help us.
Our next speaker is Kate Hudson from CND. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks very much. Our government's telling us that there isn't any money for jobs, that there's no money for health, for education, for social services. It's slashing benefits and it's attacking the poorest people. So why is it, if it says that there's no money available, that it has unlimited resources when it comes to war and when it comes to nuclear weapons? We know how many billions they've spent on the wars in Iraq, the occupation of Iraq, and the ongoing war in Afghanistan. We know that every single cruise missile they fired in the war on Libya cost £1 million. And we know that every year this government is spending £3 billion on the Trident nuclear weapon system. By coincidence, that happens to be exactly the same amount of money that it needs to spend on social housing in a year. £3 billion on social housing would meet the housing needs for that year. It would build 30,000 homes and it would house the homeless children. 75,000 children are homeless this year because of our government's warped priorities. And we also know that our government is planning to spend over £100 billion on replacing this completely useless, illegal, unnecessary, unwanted weapons of mass destruction system, Trident. The British population has overwhelmingly said, in its vast majority, it does not want to have nuclear weapons. So why is our government persisting in replacing Trident and spending money on nuclear weapons and war? We have to stand up together, we have to unite our campaigns and our causes and say we want the money of Britain spent on the priorities of the British people, and that is not what this government is spending it on. This government is spending money in the interests of the ruling class, not of the working people and the poor people and the ordinary people in Britain. This has to change, and we have to be united to reverse this criminal government's course. Thank you.
So George Osborne has announced another round of cuts today, another £3.5 billion of cuts on top of the billions that he's already cut and slashed from our public services. He wants to pretend that we're all in it together, but the richest 100 CEOs this year saw their pay increase by 10%. Average earnings for the rest of us have fallen every year for the last 4 years. Osborne has cut the top rate of tax for the super rich, slashed corporation taxes for big business, tax cuts for the rich, funding cuts for the rest. It's Robin Hood in reverse. Osborne and the coalition government are malicious, but they're also incompetent. Their plan's not working. Cutting spending in a recession is the worst thing that any government can do. It's stupid. They insist that there's no alternative, but they are wrong. What we can see here tonight on a cold night in London, what we saw in Lewisham last weekend and up and down the country is the alternative, the real alternative. The alternative is simple. Not one cut, not here, not anywhere to pay for this crisis. Make the bankers and the mega rich pay for their crisis. And that means opposing all cuts. The Tories and the Lib Dems want us to be divided. They want to rule us. They're playing library users off against the disabled. They're playing students off against patients. If they divide us against each other, they will win. We have to stand together. And to make that happen, we have to organise. On November the 14th, we saw strikes and general strikes all across Europe. Strikes against austerity, strikes against cuts. Across borders, workers and their supporters are organising, and we need to develop that level of coordination on a national basis too. When the coalition of resistance was set up, it was done to help all the separate campaigns to stand together. This, in the end, is a feeble government. Barely a week goes by without another scandal or another row. They are divided amongst themselves and they can be broken. But to do this, we have to unite. The coalition of resistance has called for a People's Assembly next year to bring together all the separate campaigns across the country, both to learn from each other and to help pull together a united movement. The Tories and the Lib Dems took a battering in 2012. Let's make 2013 the year to finish them off.
Our next speaker is Natalie Bennett, leader of the Green Party.
Thank you. It's a bit cold here tonight, you might have noticed, and you're probably feeling a bit uncomfortable. Well, I can tell you, you're not nearly as uncomfortable as George Osborne was there in the chamber today. He looked uncomfortable because he knew that he's in a hole and he can't think of anything to do except keep digging. And that's what he's doing. And the thing is, he's digging at the cost of the poor in our society, at the cost of the disabled, at the cost of the children, at the cost of our schools, at the cost of everything we need in this civilised society to give everyone a decent life. Because the fact is, it's hard to remember just now, this is a wealthy country. But the problem is, the 1% at the top have got far too much of the wealth, and the rest of us haven't got enough. Now the fact is, there is some welfare that George Osborne loves. The welfare he loves is corporate welfare. He loves to help the multinational companies, the tax evaders, the tax avoiders. That's who he wants to help. And you know what he did today? He reduced corporation tax to 21%. Shame. And he got up there proudly in the chamber and said, America's corporation tax is 40%, but ours is only 21%. Isn't that wonderful? No, it isn't. The fact is, that's just welfare for his millionaire mates. And the other thing he did is he's reduced the tax rate for the rich from 50p to 45p. And that means they're all, next year, going to have more money in their pockets as you've got less and less money in your pockets. Now what we've got to do is take a different direction. I'm going to offer you two suggestions from the Green Party. First of all, a wealth tax. They've done it in France. There's no reason why we can't do it here. The people who benefited from the boom should be able to recover from the boom. And the fact is, what we're going to do is bring back that 50p tax rate and start it at 100k. Not 150k, but 100k. Make the wealthy pay their share of tax. That's what we've got to do. The fact is, there is an alternative. As other speakers said, we've got to stick together. I'll be there at the UK Uncut protest at Starbucks, and I hope you all will be too. Will you? Yes. We'll be there, stick together, and resist the attempts to split those in work, those out of work, the disabled from those who aren't disabled. Let's stick together and fight together. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Rob Williams from National Shop Stewards Network.
Comrades, brothers and sisters, thank the organisers for inviting us to speak today, and together we'll be lobbying the TUC on Tuesday morning. 2 years ago, on the eve of Osborne's first autumn statement, the TUC organised an indoor rally just down the road. 2,000 to 3,000 people turned up. That night, Europe raged with mass demonstrations and strikes. Jeremy Paxman on Newsnight said to the TUC leader Brendan Barber, "Why are workers different in Britain to workers in Europe?" The same question was asked 3 weeks ago on November the 14th in those massive strikes in Europe. Yet the last 2 years have seen workers fighting back in this country. March 26, 2011, the biggest union demonstration in this country's history. November the 30th last year, the biggest day of strike action since the 1926 general strike. It should have been the first day of the coordinated action that we need to force this government back. But for those union leaders who shamefully signed a deal on pensions, who thought that that would settle it, today is the warning. There is no end to this attack if we can't take this government out. The Condems may be divided, they may have U-turned, they may stagger on, but as long as they are on their feet, everything we have is in their sights. Jobs, contracts, services, even any NHS. Even when they spend on the education, is to take money out of the civil service and give it to the big business buddies in the free schools and the academies. We should send a message to the Labour councillors. Don't pass on the cuts. Follow the Labour councillors in Southampton and Hull, who are refusing, some of them, to pass on the cuts. But we should send a message to the union leaders when they meet to the General Council next Tuesday. There is no alternative. If we fight together, strike together, then we can defeat this government. Comrades, the class and a vast majority of society face a disaster with 80% of the cuts to come. That's why I ask you all, join us next Tuesday at 8:30. Come to the General Council, lobby the trade union leaders, the action that we need. We tell them, yes, it may take a couple of months to prepare, but next Tuesday, name the date for a 24-hour general strike so that we can act together. Workers are prepared to fight. The Sparks won this year. The London bus drivers won this year. We should fight together, and they all say the same thing. If we strike on the same day, we can win. The PCS have announced today a national strike ballot for the new year. We call on the union leaders next week. Come together and strike with them in the year. I'll finish on this point. Next year is an anniversary, a centenary of a famous strike in Dublin, the Dublin lockout. Its leader, Big Jim Larkin, was fond of a very famous quote that he used to inspire those dockers. Their fine words, the great are only great because we are on our knees. Let's rise, let's defeat them.
I want to introduce Sean Vernell from UCU and from the Unite the Resistance Steering Committee. Sean.
Thanks a lot. I'll be brief for a change. Go ahead, don't say. Look, I remember being here 2 years ago, almost to this day. I remember Mark Savoca coining a phrase, which many people have said ever since, that this battle is a battle of our lifetimes, of all our lifetimes. And when you see today's class budget, a budget which made the rich richer and the poor poorer, we all know what that means. But the question for us is what we do about it. We saw the potential on November the 30th, and we've also seen the dangers when you step back from a fight. What happens is your enemy doesn't stand back and play by Queensberry rules. They come for you even harder. That's the hard lesson the teachers have learnt today, because when they stood back, as well as our trade union leaders stood back and did not call for more action after November the 30th, what have they done? They've decided to take away the pay of every single teacher. We need to learn that lesson and learn that lesson quick. How do we make sure we get the action off the ground? Well, Unite the Resistance is an organisation which has tried to unite all those people inside trade unions, inside the communities, who want to organise that resistance. And that means this: solidarity. We've seen teachers here today organising strike action. We need solidarity for them. So that's what we're about. If you're interested, leave your name and address here. We can send information from you, make sure that we can build the kind of networks in every organisation, in every workplace, that can put the arguments but also get the action off the ground. Solidarity.
Thanks, Sean. Okay, our next speaker is a fantastic fighter in our movement. It's Jeremy Corbyn MP, who is chair of Stop the War Coalition, who are also supporting this protest today.
Thank you very much. When Osborne spoke today, I thought the most telling phrase he used was when he decided to discuss the lives of poor people in Britain, and he said there was deep resentment about those who got up to work while their neighbours lay in bed and went off later to claim their benefits and made no contribution to our society. Trying to divide people, that is the whole strategy. A few minutes before that, he'd waxed lyrical about how corporation tax was lower, and then went on with a series of bizarre arguments that by raising the top level of tax, you get less money in because very rich people are unwilling to pay it. Therefore, if you lower it, they're more willing to pay it. Therefore, all will be well. So it's it's a very interesting concept, but unfortunately, the same concept doesn't apply at the other end of the scale. When benefits are tied to a lower rate of inflation than the real rate of inflation, CPI rather than RPI, when the minimum wage likewise, when the removal of people from benefits because they're allegedly not being able to find a job goes on, and the figure of the millions in this country who have no job, no benefit, and don't appear on any of the employment or unemployment statistics. That is the figure you want to look at, not the fiddling of all the other figures that goes on. The one thing he didn't mention, sadly Ed Balls didn't mention, and I don't know if anybody else did, was the way in which this country seems to be able to mount wars around the world, as Kate Hudson was pointing out, prepare to spend £100 billion on the replacement of the Trident nuclear missile system, and continue upgrading of aircraft and other things so that this country has, in their words, global military reach. I think it's time for a reality check. We're a country of 65 million people on the northwest coast of Europe. It's windy, it's wet, and today it's very cold. I'm not sure it's a terribly good idea for us to try to afford something we cannot afford, which is the ability to attack any country, any place, anywhere in the world, because it's supposed to make us more secure. 11 years of war in Afghanistan, 6 years of war in Iraq, £30 billion and counting spent on those wars, has not made us safer. It's given us an attack on our civil liberties, anti-terror laws, and I believe a much more dangerous place in the world. The way for peace is through justice. The way for peace is through social justice. The way for peace is not going to war and not building a militarist society. To misquote David Cameron, we, the anti-cuts movement, the anti-war movement, CND, are all in it together for spending on social needs, not on weapons of war. Thank you.
And our last speaker is Mark Dunk from Right to Work. Thank you, Mark.
Hi, thanks for everyone who stuck around. I know you want to get warm, so I'll keep it brief. I just want to bring you solidarity from all the unemployed workers in the Right to Work campaign. And I want to tell you, this is a Tory government that wants to call unemployed people lazy. But just a week ago, figures were released that shows that its flagship programme, the Work programme, is failing. It's an absolute disgrace. It's got just 31,000 out of almost 1 million that have been referred to it, jobs that lasted 6 months. Now the money's there, the money they've spent on it, I've done the maths, the money they've spent on the Work programme so far would be enough to employ 37,000 people on a 30-hour week at the UK living wage, not the minimum wage, the living wage, for a year. So the truth is that we're not lazy. This government isn't serious about getting 1 million young unemployed people back to work. And the thing they've done today, George Osborne's attack on welfare, is an absolute disgrace. It's going to make people who are already struggling, already having to top up their housing benefit out of their JSA and their ESA, it's going to make us struggle even more, and that's an absolute disgrace. And when they try and justify this, they say what Jeremy was saying. They say the shift worker goes out and he looks up at the closed curtains of the person who's claiming benefits. But I tell you, the person behind that curtain is desperate for a job. This government isn't serious. And I'll tell you something else. We can do what we can to fight. We can occupy shops that are using workfare. But what we need to win is strike action. We can't take it ourselves. But when you get that general strike that we desperately need, unemployed people will be there on the picket lines, while this Tory government and their Lib Dem friends will be vilifying strikers in the press. We have to be united to win. Solidarity.